On the 6th, the British Army set out from the line Rozcy-Lagny and that evening reached the southward bank of the Grande Marne. On the 7th and 8th, it continued its march, and on the 9th had debouched to the north of the Marne below Château-Thierry, the town that was to become famous for the American stand in 1918, taking in flank the German forces which on that day were opposing on the Ourcq, the French left army. Then it was that these forces began to retreat, while the British Army, going in pursuit and capturing 7 guns and many prisoners, reached the Aisne between Soissons and Longueval. The role of the French army, which was operating to the right of the British army, was threefold. It had to support the British, attacking on its left. It had on its right to support the center, which, from September 7th, had been subjected to a German attack of great violence. Finally, its mission was to throw back the 3 active Army Corps and the Reserve Corps which faced it. On the 7th, it made a leap forward, and on the following days reached and crossed the Marne, seizing, after desperate fighting, guns, howitzers, mitrailleuses, and 1,000,000 cartridges. On the 12th, it established itself on the north edge of the Montagne de Reims in contact with the French center, which for its part had just forced the enemy to retreat in haste. The French center consisted of a new army created on August 29th and of one of those which at the beginning of the campaign had been engaged in Belgian Luxembourg. The first had retreated on August 29th to September 5th from the Aisne to the north of the Marne and occupied the general front Sézanne to Mailly. The other, more to the east, had drawn back to the south of the line Humbeauville, Château-Beauchamp, Bignicourt, Blems, and Morupt-le-Mont. In view of his right being arrested and the defeat of his enveloping movement, the enemy made a desperate effort from the 7th to the 19th to pierce the French center to the west and to the east of Fère-Champenois. On the 8th, he succeeded in forcing back the right of the French New Army, which retired as far as Gouragoncon. On the 9th, at 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a further retreat to the south of that village, while on the left, the other Army Corps also had to go back to the line Allemand-Conantre. Despite this retreat, General Foch, commanding the army of the center, ordered a general offensive for the same day. With the Morocco division, whose behavior was heroic, he met a furious assault of the Germans on his left toward the marshes of Saint-Gond. Then, with the divisions which had just victoriously overcome the attacks of the enemy to the north of Sézanne, and with the whole of his left Army Corps, he made a flanking attack on the evening of the 9th upon the German forces, and notably the Guard, which had thrown back his right Army Corps. The enemy, taken by surprise by this bold maneuver, did not resist and beat a hasty retreat. This marked Foch as the most daring and brilliant strategist of the war. On the 11th, the French crossed the Marne between Tours-sur-Marne and Sarry, driving the Germans in front of them in disorder. On the 12th, they were in contact with the enemy to the north of the Camp de Chalon. The reserve army of the center, acting on the right of the one just referred to, had been entrusted with the mission during the 7th, 8th, and 9th of disengaging its neighbor, and it was only on the 10th that, being reinforced by an army corps from the east, it was able to make its action effectively felt. On the 11th, the Germans retired. But perceiving their danger, they fought desperately with enormous expenditure of projectiles behind strong entrenchments. On the 12th, the result had nonetheless been attained, and the 2 French center armies were solidly established on the ground gained. To the right of these 2 armies were 3 others. They had orders to cover themselves to the north and to debouch toward the west on the flank of the enemy which was operating to the west of the Argonne. But a wide interval in which the Germans were in force separated them from the French center. The attack took place nonetheless with very brilliant success for the French artillery, which destroyed 11 batteries of the 16th German Army Corps. On the 10th instant, the 8th and 15th German Army Corps counterattacked but were repulsed. On the 11th, French progress continued with new successes, and on the 12th, the French were able to face around toward the north in expectation of the near and inevitable retreat of the enemy, which, in fact, took place from the 13th. The withdrawal of the mass of the German force involved also that of the left. From the 12th onward, the forces of the enemy operating between Nancy and the Vosges retreated in a hurry before the two French armies of the east, which immediately occupied the positions that the enemy had evacuated. The offensive of the French right had thus prepared and consolidated in the most useful way the results secured by the left and center. Such was this 7 days' battle, in which more than 2 millions of men were engaged. Each army gained ground step by step, opening the road to its neighbor, supported at once by it, taking in flank the adversary which, the day before, it had attacked in front. The efforts of one articulating closely with those of the other. A perfect unity of intention and method animating the supreme command. To give this victory all its meaning, it is necessary to add that it was gained by troops which, for 2 weeks, had been retreating, and which, when the order for the offensive was given, were found to be as ardent as on the first day. It has also to be said that these troops had to meet the whole German army. Under their pressure, the German retreat at certain times had the appearance of a rout. In spite of the fatigue of the poilus, in spite of the power of the German heavy artillery, the French took colors, guns, mitrailleuses, shells, and thousands of prisoners. One German corps lost almost the entire of its artillery. In that great battle, the spectacular rush of General Gallieni's army defending Paris was one of the dramatic surprises that decided the issue. In that stroke, Gallieni sent his entire force 40 miles to attack the right wing of the German army. In this gigantic maneuver, every motor car in Paris was utilized, and the flying force of Gallieni was the army in taxicabs, a name that will live as long as France exists. General Clerget, chief of staff to Gallieni, told the story for posterity. He said, "From August 26, 1914, the German armies had been descending upon Paris by forced marches. On September 1st, they were only 3 days' march from the advanced line of the entrenched camp, which the garrison were laboring desperately to put into condition for defense. It was necessary to cover with trenches a circuit of 110 miles, install siege guns, assure the coming of supplies for them over narrow-gauge railways, assemble the food and provisions of all kinds necessary for a city of 4 million inhabitants. But on September 3rd, the intelligence service, which was working perfectly, stated about the middle of the day that the German columns, after heading straight for Paris, were swerving toward the southeast and seemed to wish to avoid the fortified camp. General Gallieni and I then had one of those long conferences that denoted grave events. They usually lasted from 2 to 5 minutes at most. The fact is that the military government of Paris did little talking. It acted. The conference reached this conclusion: if they do not come to us, we will go to them with all the force we can muster. Nothing remained to do but to make the necessary preparations. The first thing to do was not to give the alarm to the enemy. General Magnory's army immediately received orders to lie low and avoid any engagement that was not absolutely necessary. Then, care was taken to reinforce it by every means. All was ready at the designated time. In the night of September 3rd, knowing that the enemy would have to leave only a rear guard on one bank of the Ourcq, General Gallieni and General Clerget decided to march against that rear guard, to drive it back with all the weight of the Magnory army, to cut the enemy's communications, and take full advantage of his hazardous situation. Immediately, the following order was addressed to General Magnory. Because of the movement of the German armies, which seem to be slipping in before our front to the southeast, I intend to send your army to attack them in the flank, that is to say, in an easterly direction. I will indicate your line of march as soon as I learn that of the British army, but make your arrangements now so that your troops shall be ready to march this afternoon, and to begin a general movement east of the entrenched camp tomorrow." At 10 o'clock in the morning, a consultation was held by Generals Gallieni, Clerget, and Magnory, and the details of the plan of operations were immediately decided. General Joffre gave permission to attack and announced that he himself would take the offensive on the 6th. On the 5th at noon, the army from Paris fired the first shot. The Battle of the Ourcq had begun. A preface to the Marne.